Sometimes horror needs no monsters. Sometimes terror is born from sound. From a drum beat no one else hears. From footsteps no one controls. In the summer of 1518 in the city of Strasbourg, a woman stepped from her home and began to dance. She did not stop. Not on the first day, not on the second. Within a week, there were dozens. Within a month, hundreds. Dancing until their feet bled. Dancing until their bones shattered. Dancing until death. But what if this dance was more than madness? What if it was a calling? This is the story of Elias, an ordinary man who heard the music, the dancing plague. POV, Strasbourg, 1518. Chapter 1. The First Steps. My name is Elias Baumgartner. I was 32 years old when the feet of the city lost their minds. I say this because in that cursed summer of 1518, no one seemed to control their own movements anymore. Had someone told me such a tale before, I would have laughed. But today I write with trembling hands and a corroded soul, so that the world may know what I saw, what I heard, and what we danced to our deaths. It was July, and the heat clung to the skin like fever. The cobblestones of Strasbourg burned under the sun, and the cathedral bells rang hollow as if something were wrong. As if the city itself was sick. I worked as a baker in the Krutenau district. I led a simple life, waking before dawn, preparing the bread, and selling it at the market. I was never one to believe in superstitions, nor in the priest's tales of divine punishment. But that month, faith and reason began to dissolve like butter in the oven. The first was Frau Trophea. I remember it as if it were yesterday. She stepped out of her house as though listening to an invisible tune. Her feet pounded against the stone pavement violently, and her arms swung as if trying to take flight. At first we laughed. Some thought it was a strange form of protest, others swore she was possessed. But she danced, without stopping for hours. And the next day too, and the next. She did not eat, she did not drink, she did not sleep, and she did not stop. By the fourth day the laughter ceased. The sound of feet slamming against the ground began echoing through the alleyways like a summons. Others started joining her. First a young blacksmith, then a seamstress, and then an old blind man who knew only silence. What guided them? No one knew. Perhaps the music of a hell only they could hear. Hey, the sound of leather shoes slamming against stone became part of the routine, like the rooster's crow or the clinking of coins. But it was not the sound of life. It was the sound of agony. Blooded feet kept moving even when the bodies had already given out. It was as if willpower had surrendered to something deeper, something crueler. I saw Frau Trophea collapse 3 times in the cathedral square, and 3 times she rose again, as though an invisible hand yanked her back into the frenzy. The children stopped playing in the streets. The bells, which once marked the rhythms of the day, now tolled with a deep, mournful tone. The bishop ordered prayers, fasting, and collective penance. "We have sinned," they cried during Mass. But the dancing did not stop. Little by little, more than 30 people were trapped in the same trance. Every night, groans and cries of pain echoed through the stone and wooden houses. One young man tore the nails from his own feet to relieve the pressure. A woman bashed her head against a wall until she passed out, only to wake up and keep dancing. And me? I watched, first with fear, then with guilt, because deep down there was something mesmerizing about it. It was like watching souls being slowly ripped from their bodies, not by swords or sickness, but by a rhythm no one else could hear. Chapter 2. The Men of Reason. Then came the doctors, men in black with feathers pinned to their hats and glassy eyes. One of them, Dr. Klaus Brenner, claimed it was an excess of hot blood in the brain. He ordered the dancers to be taken to the carpenter's hall, a large space where they could release the body's heat safely. They brought in musicians and had carpenters build a wooden stage, as if this was some kind of spectacle. I was one of those who helped drag the bodies. I remember how their hands felt, cold as stone, yet still twitching. They didn't scream. They only wept silently as their feet convulsed like broken puppets. Inside the hall, they were given food, water, and space. But this only increased the number of dancers. 30 became 60, then 100. The sound of wood creaking under the weight of dancing bodies became a constant lament. Day and night. And then something strange began to happen. Some of them started smiling, not a smile of joy but of delirium, the kind you see on a madman about to leap off a cliff. A man named Heinrich screamed, "I see the light, she dances with me," before dropping dead, his eyes wide and his lips still curled upward. Even in death, his feet kept moving for a moment. I swear on my parents' bones, his toes were still dancing. At first, Dr. Klaus spoke with confidence. He scribbled notes on stained papers, measuring the rhythm of their feet with a wooden rod. He claimed everything would resolve with rest and a balance of humors. But after 2 weeks, his eyes were bloodshot, his hands trembling. He stopped writing. He spent his days standing motionless in the corner of the room, watching, just that, watching and muttering as if repeating a prayer or a curse. The musicians brought in to help began losing their minds as well. One cut the strings of his violin and whispered that he could no longer compete with the real music. Another played without stopping until his fingers split open. Yet he kept playing, eyes fixed on nothing, as if entranced. And the number of dancers grew, 150, maybe 200. I lost count. The authorities began contradicting themselves. The clergy called it divine punishment. Perhaps the saints were furious. Some invoked Saint Vitus, patron of epileptics and dancers. They organized processions, prayers, even scattered relics in the square. A fragment of bone supposedly belonging to the saint himself was displayed before the crowd. But no one stopped, not a single step. On the contrary, that very day, 3 children began dancing too. They were too young to understand the world, but not too young to be devoured by it. The doctors blamed the planets, moldy bread, the waters of the Rhine. Each offered an explanation flimsier than the last. Meanwhile, the dancers continued. In the hall, in the streets, in the fields beyond, as if the earth itself had awakened and was beating a drum no one could see. And then, something began to change in me. The nights grew too short. When I closed my eyes, I dreamed of moving feet, of shadows dancing on the walls like puppets. I woke with a racing heart, my leg muscles tense, as if I too were about to move. I began walking faster through the city, then running for no reason. My hands trembled. I felt a presence, like heat at the base of my skull, like a constant, insistent whisper. Sometimes I heard a faint drumbeat, distant, like a faraway heart pulsing in the cobblestones. One night, I saw my shadow dance before my body moved. Chapter 3. The invisible music. The beats were everywhere. No, not from real drums. Those had fallen silent after one of the musicians tore out his own tongue with his teeth. I speak of something deeper, more primal. The rhythm seemed to rise from the stones, from the trees, even from the air itself. A pulse throbbing beneath the skin, as if the whole world had a diseased heart, and now it was pounding against mine. On the 5th Sunday after Frau Trophea first began to dance, I went to the cathedral. Not out of faith, but desperation. I hoped to find some answer in the eyes of Father Matthias, a man I'd known since childhood. He was old, frail, but his voice had always been steady as steel until that week. I found him kneeling before the altar, sweating in silence. He was whispering something that, from a distance, sounded like Latin. But as I drew closer, I realized it was just one word, repeated over and over: saltatio, 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 dance. I touched his shoulder. He looked up at me with wide, lost eyes. They are no longer with us, Elias. The spirit of the air has taken them. It is not punishment, it is contagion. Contagion. That unsettled me more than anything. Not because he spoke of disease, but because he spoke of spirit, as if some entity had spread like fire, passing through bodies, minds, and wills. I began watching the dancers more closely. It was dangerous. The doctors warned us to keep our distance, but I couldn't help it. Something in me needed to see, to understand. I spent an entire night on the roof of an inn, staring down at the town square, and there they were, bodies jerking like puppets pulled by invisible strings. Yet there was something synchronized beneath the chaos, like a ritual, a nameless ceremony. They spun, shuddered, fell, and rose again, and then one of them smiled at me, a young woman. Her clothes were torn, blood running down her shins like dark ink. Yet she stared at me with a terrible focus, and her lips moved without sound. I read them. You hear it too, don't you? I fled before I could answer. That night, I dreamed of ropes. Ropes tied to my wrists, ankles, skull. I was lifted by them, spinning in the air like a doll, while hundreds watched in silence. And beneath it all, a drum beat, slow, deep, inevitable. Each strike tore a piece of me away. I woke with my sheets tangled around my legs. I was drenched, shaking, and when I rose from bed, my right foot moved on its own. It was subtle, a twitch like a misstep, but I felt it. It moved without my command. And in that moment, I knew I was hearing it too. The beats were everywhere. No, not the real drums. Those had fallen silent days ago, after the last flutist threw himself into the Rhine with lungs full of laughter. I speak of a sound no one played. A sound that didn't come from outside, but from within. At first, I only felt it at night. It was like the echo of a dream, that faint vibration that clings to your chest before waking. But as days passed, its presence grew. When I walked the streets, my steps began following a rhythm not my own. My fingers drummed against tables, even when I tried to stay still. There was something beating invisibly inside me, behind my eyes, between my ribs. I started avoiding mirrors. One afternoon, as I washed my face in the town square's fountain, I looked up and saw my reflection. It was me, yes, but not quite. There was a slight sway, as if my reflection breathed out of sync, and for a moment, just one, I saw my lips move before I moved them, as if something else was rehearsing how to be me. The city was unraveling, shops closed. The once bustling market stood silent and dust-choked. The cathedral bells rang with no one pulling the ropes, and the dancers, God, there were so many, everywhere, in the fields, on the staircases, even inside churches. It was as if the earth itself had begun dancing with them, shifting beneath the feet of the untouched. I remember one woman, Margaret, a gentle seamstress, always smiling. One day, as we spoke outside the bakery, she stopped mid-sentence. Her eyes glazed over, and then her feet, they began to move. "What's happening?" I asked. She didn't answer. Her legs trembled as if pulled by strings. She grabbed for the door handle, but her fingers slipped. Her shoulders jerked, her ankles twisted, and then she collapsed to her knees. I rushed to hold her. "Margaret, fight it! You're strong!" I shouted, desperate, but she looked at me and then smiled. A broken, crooked, sorrowful smile. I don't want to dance, Elias, but he does. "Who?" I whispered, shaking, but she was already gone. Margaret writhed on the ground, eyes rolling back, her feet slamming against the cobblestones as if begging for freedom or punishment. I carried her to the dancers' hall. That's what we did now. We hauled bodies like plague victims. Some still spoke, others only wept, and some sang. Yes. They began to sing, not in French or German, not even Latin. A wordless language, melodies of vows and sighs, like some ancient lament drifting through the halls. It made my skin crawl. Doctors tried to transcribe the songs, but gave up after one of them started bleeding from the ears. Dr. Klaus no longer spoke. He just wandered among the bodies with a blank notebook. At first, I thought he was still writing. Then I realized he was pretending, flipping pages of a book with nothing in it, muttering to himself. Not illness, obedience. Obedience to what? That's when I began to fear for myself, for my mind. I started seeing figures. At night, through my window's cracks, I swear I saw shapes dancing in the forest. Tall silhouettes with arms too long, spinning between trees as if searching for someone. Sometimes they moved too fast. Other times they just stood there watching, and every time I looked, the drum grew clear. A dum, dum, dum. Rising from the ground, from my bones, from the pit of my chest, I tried to leave Strasbourg. The guards wouldn't allow it. They called it containment, but I saw their eyes. They were afraid to leave too, afraid to carry it beyond the walls. I began writing this account, the very one you read now, not out of hope, so someone would know I fought, that I resisted, that I saw it all and clung to sanity like shipwrecked wood. But every night it gets harder. With every unseen beat, my body weighs less. And last night, as I slept, I woke to my feet dancing on their own. Chapter 4. The Call of St. Vitus. The name began spreading like a whisper, first among the priests, then on the lips of the people. Ah, St. Vitus. They said he alone could stop the dancing, a martyr, young and pure, who protected those afflicted with tremors and convulsions. It wasn't long before the men of the cloth declared what was happening in Strasbourg was not illness, it was possession, a punishment, an invasion of evil spirits, and only a saint could stand against it. The bishop ordered a procession. The image of Saint Vitus was taken from a distant chapel and brought to the city center, a statue carved from dark wood. Eyes turned skyward, arms raised as if pleading for peace. On the day of the procession, the sky dawned gray and still. No wind, no bird song. The streets were packed. Those who could still walk knelt. Those already dancing writhed harder. I went. I don't know why. Maybe out of fear. Maybe hope. Or maybe because deep down I too felt something moving inside me. The people sang hymns in Latin, but the melody tangled with the moans of bodies in trance. The crowd was a sea of cracked voices and pleading eyes. The bells rang, but they sounded off-key, as if even the bronze had fallen ill. And then the ritual began. Priests sprinkled holy water over the dancers. They screamed, shuddered, some fainted. One or two stopped dancing for minutes, only to start again, as if the relief were just a cruel pause before the next spasm. The priest shouted, "Begone, unclean spirit! By the name of Saint Vitus, release these souls!" But there was no miracle. One of the dancers, a strong man named Ulrich, snatched the silver cross from a priest's hands and hurled it at the saint's statue. The cross clattered to the ground, and Ulrich's head threw back in laughter. He spun, leaped, smashed his skull against the cobblestones, and laughed harder. Laughed as his teeth shattered. That night, the city fell silent. Not because the dancing stopped, but because something had shifted. People began hearing things, voices, chants from nowhere, echoes that danced along their walls as if the city itself had become a profane church where the only sermon was the sound of bodies in motion. My neighbor Anke came to my door, shaking, eyes sunken, lips parched. I saw Saint Vitus in a dream, Ashida. He was dancing too, but his feet were on fire. I shut the door without a word, but her words stayed with me because that same night, I also dreamed. Not of the saint, but of the city's ground splitting open, and from it rose a drum of flesh. And there were people dancing on it, their eyes stitched shut, limbs loose like dolls. And at the top, someone stood. I couldn't see his face, but he watched me. And when I woke, I was on my knees before the image of Saint Vitus. How I got there, I don't know, but I was drenched in sweat, fingers curled in prayer. And my feet were caked in dirt. The city was sinking. Churches began holding mass daily. People wept through confessions, though they had no sins left. Priests walked the streets with censers, as if the air itself had been poisoned by invisible plagues. But it was the music that had tainted everything. The dancers now numbered over 300. Some died. They simply collapsed, hearts burst in their chests or muscles torn to shreds. But even then, their bodies seemed to refuse death. There were reports of a boy who kept twitching hours after being declared dead. Another was buried, and by morning the earth over his grave had been disturbed. Father Matthias lost his faith. One day he entered the cathedral, locked the doors, and set the altar ablaze. If God will not hear us, burning his house is a scream he cannot ignore. He roared as flames devoured the pews and the saints' images. But not even fire could silence the music. It continued, always there, beating, pulsing, inside me. And now every step I take feels rehearsed, as if another Elias walks ahead, guiding me with gestures I don't recognize, but obey. The week after the cathedral burned, something shifted in people's eyes. It wasn't just fear anymore, it was resignation. The dance was no longer merely a sickness, a punishment, or a possession. Now many saw it as prophecy, a sign that something sacred or profane was unfolding, and that resistance was futile. Pamphlets began appearing on doorsteps, drawings of hollow-eyed men and women circling a ring, bearing the words, "The body dances when the soul is summoned." Others, more fanatical, declared Saint Vitus was no savior, but a messenger, that his dance heralded the end, or perhaps the dawn of another age. The city split in two. On one side, those seeking salvation. They prayed, fasted, flogged themselves in the streets. Some walked naked, covered in ashes, with signs hanging from their necks. I shall not resist when my hour comes. On the other, those awaiting visitation. These ones lay their bodies in the square, arms outstretched, offering themselves to the music. Some spent days like this, fasting, murmuring broken phrases, until inevitably their bodies began to move. Not by will, but by summons. One night I heard knocking, 3 sharp raps. When I opened the door, no one was there, just a small wooden icon left on the ground. The image of a man with flaming feet, arms raised, surrounded by tiny dancing figures. No signature, just a carving on the back. Vida sees you. I locked every bolt, but the fear didn't stay outside. It had entered with me. The icon, the knocks, the sound, and then I heard it. Not with my ears, with my skin. The air itself trembled with a distant, subtle chant. A melody needing no instruments. It lived in the creak of wood, the wind through cracks, the very breath of the world. A voice, or many, whispered words I didn't know but understood in my marrow. Flesh is clay, but rhythm is eternal. I went to the window. Outside, dozens stood gathered in silence, not dancing, just looking up, looking at me. Then, as if following an invisible conductor, they stepped forward. Then again and again, slowly, like rehearsing a simple choreography. I drew the curtains. By morning, bare footprints marked the street, and a single word in charcoal on my door. And soon. On the 8th day of St. Vitus' procession, they found a priest in the bell tower with his wrist shattered. Not cut, not wounded, shattered, as if he tried to restrain his own arms by force. A note pinned to his chest read, I danced in darkness, deaf to the music. Now I hear it. Now it's too late. The other priests kept silent for 2 full days. No mass, no blessings. Some claimed the clergy was on spiritual retreat. But I saw with my own eyes, they were hiding, locked in the cathedral crypt, chanting Latin, burning incense until their eyes bled, as if trying to smother the air itself or the music. But nothing helped anymore, nothing at all. And then at last came what they called the Great Dance. About 40 people began moving as one in the central square. Not spasming like the others, in perfect sync. It was beautiful, horribly beautiful. Men, women, children, silent. Their steps slow, almost graceful. They turned, bowed, raised arms like branches. Tears streaked their faces, but their bodies didn't tremble. As if they weren't there anymore, as if they'd been replaced. The crowd watched in reverence. Some applauded, others wept. And at the circle center stood an empty space, a space that seemed to wait for me. Final chapter, the last step. I didn't fight. It would be a lie to say I resisted until the end. I wanted to. My body wanted to. My mind tried. But there comes a moment when the difference between will and inevitability becomes indistinguishable. It happened when I saw the completed circle. That morning, the square was no longer a square. It was a stage, an altar. The ground was covered in a spiral of ashes, made from candle wax, human hair, and ground bones. The pattern was too precise to have been made by hands in trance. Someone was orchestrating this. At the center, a child danced. A little girl, small, thin, with eyes so wide they looked cracked. She spun without stopping, bare feet tearing skin on the rough stone. But she didn't cry, didn't tremble. She was in ecstasy. She was singing. And when I heard the song, my body surrendered. I fell to my knees. My fingers splayed on their own. My head tilted back. A heat rose up my spine, like an ancient touch, ancestral, recognizing me. Now you hear. Those words didn't come from the world. They came from inside me, or perhaps from something that had been waiting there for me all along. Something that knew my name before even my parents called me Elias. I felt the rhythm, not as sound but as truth. A slow, steady pulse, the heartbeat of the world itself. And it told me time was a cycle, that all life was dance. That the entire universe turned in circles, spinning since before the first stone and would spin after the last breath. In that moment, I understood. We weren't sick, we were being awakened. The faces around me faded. There was no more town, no people, no pain, only bodies like marionettes moving in perfect unison. Our feet struck the ground as if summoning something that slept beneath it. as if we were waking what the earth had hidden out of fear. And then I saw her, not with my eyes, with something beyond sight, an immense figure, formless yet whole, a body woven from shadow and music, a face multiplied, 1,000 mouths dancing without sound, a chorus whispering from deep in the earth. The cycle returns. It was she who had been calling from the very beginning. Not Saint Vitus, not God. Her. The one who dances behind reality, the one who never stopped, the one who whispers songs to the mad, visions to the saints, and fevers to the dancers. She loomed over the city like a living cloud, and in her wake, I heard the sound of countless feet across centuries dancing as we did. In forgotten villages, in ancient forests, in rituals erased by history. We were not the first. We were never the first. The dance ended at dawn. Bodies lay on the ground, some dead, others free. I still breathed, but something in me had broken, or perhaps become whole. I don't know how much time has passed since that night. The city fell silent. The priests left. The survivors speak little. Some call it madness, others a curse. I only smile, because I know the truth. The music never stopped. It only grew quiet, waiting, watching, and one day it will return. Now I live alone in the ruins of Strasbourg. The houses stand empty, the squares still, but every night when I close my eyes, my feet still move. And sometimes in the silence before dawn, I hear a child singing. The cycle returns, the cycle returns, the cycle returns. The end.